Chapter 4. That winter, the winter of the elephant, was, for the city of Baltese, a particular miserable season. The skies were filled with thick, lowering clouds that obscured the sun and condemned the city to a series of days that resembled nothing so much as a single, unending dusk. It was unimaginably, unbelievably cold. Darkness prevailed. The crippled Madame Lavant, sunk deep in a gloom of her own, took to visiting the prison. She came in the late afternoon. The magician could hear the accusing creak of the wheels of her chair as it was pushed down the long corridor. Yet, when the noblewoman appeared before him, her eyes wide and pleading, a blanket thrown over her useless legs, and her servant standing at attention behind her, the magician managed, somehow, each time, to be astonished at her presence. Madame Lavant spoke to the magician. She said, "But perhaps you do not understand. I was crippled by an elephant that came through the roof." The magician responded. He said, "Madame Lavant, I assure you, I intended lilies. I intended only a bouquet of lilies." Every day the magician and the noblewoman spoke to each other with an urgency that belied the fact that they had spoken the same words the day before and the day before that. Every afternoon the magician and Madame Lavant faced each other in the gloom of the prison and said exactly the same thing. The noblewoman's manservant was named Hans Ickman, and he had been in the service of Madame Lavant since she was a child. He was her adviser and confidant, and she trusted him in all things. Before he came to serve Madame Lavant, however, Hans Ickman had lived in a small town in the mountains, and he had there a family, brothers, a mother, and a father, and a dog who was famous for being able to leap across the river that ran through the woods beyond the town. The river was too wide for Hans Ickman and his brothers to leap across. It was too wide even for a grown man to leap, but the dog would take a running jump and sail effortlessly across the water. She was a white dog, and small, and other than her ability to jump the river, she was in no way extraordinary. Hans Ickman, as he aged, had forgotten about the dog entirely. Her miraculous ability had receded to the back of his mind. But the night that the elephant came crashing through the ceiling of the opera house, the manservant remembered again, for the first time in a long time, the little white dog. Standing in the prison, listening to the endless, unvarying exchange between Madame Lavant and the magician, Hans Ickman thought about being a boy, waiting on the bank of the river with his brothers, and watching the dog run and then fling herself into the air. He remembered how, in mid-leap, she would always twist her body in a small, unnecessary gesture, a fillip of joy, to show that this impossible thing was easy for her. Madame Lavant said, "But perhaps you do not understand." And the magician said, "I intended only lilies." Hans Ickman closed his eyes and remembered the dog suspended in the air above the river, her white body set afire by the light of the sun. But what was the dog's name? He could not recall. She was gone, and her name had gone with her. Life was so short, so many beautiful things slipped away. Where, for instance, were his brothers now? He did not know. He could not say. Madame Lavant said, "I was crushed by an elephant." The magician said, "I intended only—" "Please," said Hans Ickman. He opened his eyes. "It is important that you say what you mean to say. Time is too short. You must speak words that matter." The magician and the noblewoman were silent for a moment. And then Madame Lavant opened her mouth. She said, "Perhaps you do not understand." The magician said, "I intended only lilies." "Enough," said Hans Ickman. He took hold of Madame Lavant's chair and turned it around. "That is enough. I cannot bear to hear it any more. I truly cannot." He wheeled her around, down the long corridor and out of the prison, and into the cold, dark Baltesian afternoon. "Perhaps you do not understand. I was crippled." "No," said Hans Ickman. "No." Madame Lavant fell silent. And it was in this manner that she paid her last official visit to the magician in prison. Peter could, from the window of the attic of the apartment Polonaise, see the turrets of the prison. He could see, too, the spire of the city's largest cathedral, and the gargoyles crouched there, glowering on the ledges. If he looked out into the distance, he could see the great grand homes of the nobility high atop the hill. Below him were the twisting, turning, cobblestoned streets, the small shops with their crooked tiled roofs, and the pigeons who forever perched atop them, singing sad songs that did not quite begin and never truly ended. It was a terrible thing to gaze upon it all and know that somewhere beneath one of those roofs, hidden perhaps in some dark alley, was the very thing that he needed, wanted, and could not have. How could it be that against all odds, all expectations, all reason, an elephant could miraculously appear in the city of Baltese, and then just as quickly disappear, and that he, Peter Augustus Duchesne, who needed desperately to find her, did not know, could not even begin to imagine the how or where of searching for her. Looking out over the city, Peter decided that it was a terrible and complicated thing to hope, and that it might be easier instead to despair. "Come away from the window," Vilna Lutz called to Peter. Peter held very still. He found that it was hard now for him to look at Vilna Lutz's face. "Private Duchesne," said Vilna Lutz. "Sir?" said Peter without turning. "A battle is waging," said Vilna Lutz. "A battle between good and evil. Whose side will you do battle on, Private Duchesne?" Peter turned and faced the old man. "What is this? Are you crying?" "No," said Peter, "I am not." But when he put his hand to his face, he was surprised to discover that his cheek was wet. "That is good," said Vilna Lutz. "Soldiers do not weep. At least they should not weep. It is not to be borne, the weeping of soldiers. Something is amiss in the universe when a soldier cries. Hark! Do you hear the rattle of muskets?" I do not," said Peter. "Oh, it is cold," said the old soldier. "Still we must practice maneuvers. The marching must begin. Yes, the marching must begin." Peter did not move. "Private Duchesne, you will march. Armies must move. Soldiers must march." Peter sighed. His heart was so heavy inside of him that he did not, in truth, think that he had it in him to move at all. He lifted one foot and then the other. "Higher," said Vilna Lutz. "March with purpose. March like a man. March as your father would have marched." What difference does it make if an elephant has come? Peter thought as he stood in the same place and marched without going anywhere at all. It is just some grand and terrible joke that the fortune-teller has told me. My sister is not alive. There's no reason to hope. The longer he marched, the more convinced Peter became that things were indeed hopeless, and that an elephant was a ridiculous answer to any question, but a particularly ridiculous answer to the question posed by the human heart. Chapter 5. The people of the city of Baltese became obsessed with the elephant. In the market square and in the ballrooms, in the stables and in the gaming houses, in the churches and in the squares, it was the elephant that came through the roof, the elephant conjured by the magician, the elephant that crippled the noblewoman. The bakers of the city concocted a flat, oversized pastry and filled it with cream and sprinkled it with cinnamon and sugar and called the confection an elephant ear, and the people could not get enough of it. The street vendors sold for exorbitant prices chunks of plaster that had fallen onto the stage when the elephant made her dramatic appearance. "Cataclysm!" the vendors shouted. "Mayhem! Possess the plaster of the disaster!" The puppet shows in the public gardens featured elephants that came crashing onto the stage, crushing the other puppets beneath them, making the young children laugh and clap in delight and recognition. From the pulpits of the churches, the preachers spoke about divine intervention, the surprises of fate, the wages of sin, and the dire consequences of magic gone afool. The elephant's dramatic and unexpected appearance changed the way the people of the city of Baltese spoke. If, for instance, a person was deeply surprised or moved, he or she would say, "I was, you understand, in the presence of the elephant." As for the fortune-tellers of the city, they were kept particularly busy. They gazed into their teacups and crystal balls. They read the palms of thousands of hands. They studied their cards and cleared their throats and predicted that amazing things were yet to come. If elephants could arrive without warning, then a dramatic shift had certainly occurred in the universe. The stars were aligning themselves for something even more spectacular. Rest assured. Rest assured. Meanwhile, in the dance halls and the ballrooms, the men and the women of the city, the low and the high, danced the same dance, a swaying, lumbering two-step called, of course, the elephant. Everywhere, always it was the elephant, the magician's elephant. "It is absolutely ruining the social season," said the Countess Quintet to her husband. "It is all people will speak of. Why, it is as bad as a war. Actually, it is worse. At least with the war, there are well-dressed heroes capable of making interesting conversation. But what do we have here? Nothing. Nothing but a smelly, loathsome beast, and yet people will insist on speaking of nothing else. I truly feel, I am quite certain, I am absolutely convinced that I will lose my mind if I hear the word elephant one more time." "Elephant," muttered the Count. "What did you say?" said the Countess. She whirled around and stared at her husband. "Nothing," said the Count. "Something must be done," said the Countess. "Indeed," said Count Quintet. "And who will do it?" "I beg your pardon?" The Count cleared his throat. "I only wanted to say, my dear, that you must admit that what occurred was indeed truly extraordinary." "Why must I admit it? What was extraordinary about it?" The Countess had not been present at the opera house that fateful evening, and so she had missed the cataclysmic event, and the Countess was the kind of person who hated most horribly to miss cataclysmic events. "Well, you see," began Count Quintet. "I do not see," said the Countess, "and you will not make me see." "Yes," said her husband, "I suppose that much is true." Unlike his wife, the Count had been in attendance at the theater that night. He had been seated so close to the stage that he had felt the rush of displaced air that presaged the elephant's appearance. "There must be a way to wrest control of the situation," said the Countess Quintet. She paced back and forth. "There must be some way to regain the social season." The Count closed his eyes. He felt again the breeze of the elephant's arrival. The whole thing had happened in an instant, but it had also occurred so slowly. He who never cried had cried that night because it was as if the elephant had spoken to him and said, "Things are not at all what they seem to be. Oh, no, not at all." To be in the presence of such a thing, to feel such a feeling. Count Quintet opened his eyes. "My dear," he said, "I have a solution." "You do?" said the Countess. "Yes." "And what exactly would the solution be?" "If everyone speaks of nothing but the elephant, and if you desire to be the center of the heart of the social season, then you must be the one with the thing that everyone speaks of." "But what can you mean?" said the Countess. Her lower lip quivered. "Whatever can you mean?" "Well, what I mean, my dear, is that you must bring the magician's elephant here." When the Countess demanded of the universe that it moved in a certain way, the universe trembled, and, eager to please, did as she bade it do. And so, in the matter of the elephant and the Countess, this is how it happened. This is how it unfolded. There was not at her home, as lavish and well-appointed a home as it was, a door large enough for an elephant to walk through. The Countess Quintet hired a dozen craftsmen. The men worked around the clock, and within a day's time a wall was knocked down, and an enormous, brightly painted, handsomely decorated door was installed. The elephant was summoned and arrived under cover of night, escorted by the captain of the police, who ushered her through the door that had been constructed expressively for her. Then, relieved beyond all measure to have done with the affair, he tipped his hat to the Countess and left. The door was closed and locked behind him, and the elephant became the property of the Countess Quintet, who had paid the owner of the opera house money sufficient to repair and retile the whole of his roof a dozen times over. The elephant belonged entirely to the Countess Quintet, who had written to Madame Levon and expressed at great length and with utmost eloquence her sorrow over the unspeakable and inexplicable tragedy that had befallen the noblewoman. She offered Madame Levon her full and enthusiastic support, in the further prosecution and punishment of the magician. The fate of the elephant rested absolutely in the hands of Countess Quintet, who had made a very generous contribution indeed to the policeman's fund. The elephant, you will now understand, belonged, lock, stock, and barrel, to the Countess. The beast was installed in the ballroom, and the ladies and gentlemen, dukes and duchesses, prince and princesses, counts and countesses flocked to her. They gathered around her. The elephant became, quite literally, the center of the social season. Chapter 6. Peter dreamed. Wilna Lutz was ahead of him in a field, and he, Peter, was running to catch up. "Hurry!" shouted Wilna Lutz. "You must run like a soldier!" The field was a field of wheat, and as Peter ran, the wheat grew taller and taller, and soon it was so tall that Wilna Lutz disappeared entirely from view, and Peter could only hear his voice shouting, "Hurry! Hurry! Run like a man! Run like a soldier!" "It is no good," said Peter. "No good at all. I have lost him. I will never catch him, and it is pointless to run." He sat down and looked up at the blue sky. Around him the wheat continued to grow, forming a golden wall, sealing him in, protecting him. "It is almost like being buried," he thought. "I will stay here forever, for all time. No one will ever find me. Yes," he said, "I will stay here." And it was then that he noticed that there was a door in the wall of wheat. Peter stood and went to the wooden door and knocked on it. The door swung open. "Hello?" called Peter. No one answered him. "Hello?" he called again. And when there was still no answer, he pushed the door open farther and stepped over the threshold and entered the apartment he had once shared with his mother and father. Someone was crying. He went into the bedroom, and there on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, alone and wailing, was a baby. "Whose baby is this?" Peter said. "Please, whose baby is this?" The baby continued to cry, and the sound of it was heartbreaking to him, so he bent and picked her up. "Oh," he said, "shh, there." He held the baby and rocked her back and forth. After a time, she stopped crying and fell asleep. Peter could not get over how small she was, how easy it was to hold her, how comfortably she fit in his arms. The door to the apartment stood open, and he could hear the music of the wind moving through the grain. He looked out the window and saw the evening sun hanging golden over the field. For as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but light. And he knew, suddenly and absolutely, that the baby he held in his arms was his sister, Adele. When he woke from his dream, Peter sat up straight and looked around the dark room and said, "But that is how it was. She did cry. I remember. I held her, and she cried. So she could not, after all, have been born dead and without ever drawing breath, as Wilna Lutz had said time and time again. She cried. You must live to cry." He lay back down and imagined the weight of his sister in his arms. "Yes," he thought. "She cried. I held her. I told my mother that I would watch out for her always. That is how it happened. I know it to be true." He closed his eyes, and again he saw the door from his dreams and felt what it was like to be inside that apartment and to hold his sister and look out into the field of light. The dream was too beautiful to doubt. The fortune-teller had not lied. And if she had not lied about his sister, then perhaps she had told the truth about the elephant too. "The elephant," said Peter. He spoke the words aloud, to the ever-present dark, to the snoring Wilna Lutz, to the whole of the sleeping and indifferent city of Baltese. "The elephant is what matters. She is with the Countess. I must find some way to see her. I will ask Leo Matien, who is an officer of the law, and he will know what to do. Surely there is some way to get inside, to get to the Countess, and then to the elephant, so it can all be undone, so that it can at last be put right. Because Adele does live. She lives." Less than 5 blocks from the apartment's Polonaise stood a grim, dark building that bore the somewhat improbable name of the Orphanage of the Sisters of Perpetual Light. And on the top floor of that building was an austere dormitory outfitted with a series of small iron beds lined up side by side, one right after the other like metal soldiers. In each of these beds slept an orphan, and the last of the beds in a drafty, over-large dormitory was occupied by a small girl named Adele, who soon after the incident at the opera house began to dream of the magician's elephant. In Adele's dream, the elephant came and knocked at the door of the orphanage. Sister Marie, the sister of the door, the nun who admitted unwanted children to the orphanage, and the only person who was ever allowed to open or close the front door of the orphanage of the Sisters of Perpetual Light, was, of course, the one who answered the elephant's knock. "Good of the evening to you," said the elephant, inclining her head toward Sister Marie. "I have come for the collection of the little person that you are calling by the name Adele." "Pardon?" said Sister Marie. "Adele," said the elephant. "I have come for the collection of her. She is belonging elsewhere besides." "You must speak up," said Sister Marie. "I am old, and I do not hear well." "It is the one you are calling Adele," said the elephant in a slightly louder voice. "I am coming to keep her, and for taking her to where she is, after all, belonged." "I am truly sorry," said Sister Marie, and her face did look sad. "I cannot understand a word you are saying. Perhaps it is because you are an elephant? Could that be it? Could it be because of the hindrance in our communication? Understand, I have nothing against elephants. You yourself are exceptionally elegant elephant, and obviously well-mannered. There is no doubt, but the fact remains that I can make no sense of your words, so I must bid you a good night." And with this, Sister Marie closed the door. From the window of the dormitory, Adele watched the elephant walk away. "Madam Elephant!" she shouted, banging on the window. "Here I am! Here! I am Adele! I am the one you're looking for!" But the elephant continued to walk away from her. She went down the street and became smaller and then smaller still until, in the peculiar and frustrating sleight of hand that often occurs in dreams, the elephant was transformed into a mouse and then scurried into the gutter and disappeared entirely from Adele's view. And then it began to snow. The cobblestones of the streets and the tiles of the roofs became coated in white. It snowed and snowed until everything disappeared. The world itself soon seemed to cease to exist, erased, bit by the white of the falling snow. In the end, there was nothing and no one in the world except Adele, who stood alone at that window of her dream, waiting.